Hello, take two. We are here.
Sorry, we crashed, so we're just gonna start over. So if you're joining us again, hello. My name is Jess. Welcome to RPG R&D. I am here with my co-host Craig Campbell
Hello.
and with our special guest co-host of the week, Brennan Taylor.
Hello.
Hey Brennan, would you like to reintroduce yourself and tell us again what you do?
Sure. My name is Brennan Taylor. I'm a game designer, tabletop games. I work with Galileo Games is the company that I publish most of my stuff through. And I've done a number of tabletop games, including Bulldogs, Mortal Coil, and How We Came to Live Here. And I was also one of the co-founders of Indie Press Revolution, which is a small games fulfillment company.
Yeah, and when in-person conventions are a thing again, you've certainly seen their booths before if you've been to gaming conventions, but I'm looking forward to the time when we can have that again.
Yes, me too. I missed my conventions this year pretty badly.
We all do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really feeling it, especially around the holidays too. If you can't tell, like I've just dominated. Like before the crash of our stream, I was talking about the pandemic too. Craig, do you want to tell us a little bit about our podcast in general and what our current episode is about?
Sure. We're hitting a bunch of different topics. And starting tonight with a GMing topic like we've been doing so far, in this kind of geared toward people who are perhaps GMing for the first time. So just kind of a general overview and some ideas regarding ways to play, what's right for your game, short-term campaign, long-term campaign, in-person, online. There's a lot of different ways to play an RPG. They don't all have to be sitting at a table, traditional style, as it were. So, Jess, why don't you get us started on that?
Yeah, I'm not going to knock online play. I've been doing a lot of online play, obviously, but my personal preferred style is definitely sitting around at a table in person so you can talk and you can have your side conversations. You can get up and go get drinks and chat and take breaks. Your GM can easily break off with people to talk with them one-on-one. I just really, really miss that about gaming. The kinds of games I like to play just work better when everyone is together and all of the things that the meet space holds instead of our virtual space. It's just so much. I don't know. It feels more like a social activity rather than just a game, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say that the pandemic has increased my appreciation for online gaming because I wouldn't be getting any at all if it weren't for that. And I am actually able to enjoy some gaming, which is good. But I really miss hanging around the table with people. It's still my preferred method of play.
And
Yeah.
and it tends to be mine as well. But for people who don't have a group of people right near them who they can get together with easily. All those people who are living out in the little tiny towns who have come and discovered RPGs and are digging RPGs, like online play is the savior. Like there was a time when that like a person who lived in the little town who like just didn't get a chance to get together with people. All they really had were conventions. So they'd really go all in and they'd go to conventions and they would just game around the clock, right? Because that's where they got their fix was at, one or two or three conventions a year that they could afford to go to that were within a decent distance or weren't too expensive or whatever. But nowadays it's a question of just finding kind of the thing that works for the group that you're dealing with. If you can find a group that you can sit down at a table, that's great. But there is something to be said for I don't have to take the time to drive to somebody's place and then drive back after the game is done. You can just sit down, boom, have the game, get up and go with whatever it is you've got going on in your life. So, online games are, and the tools are in place on top of it. There's
Mm-hmm.
Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and everything. So, and Zoom, like we're using here, if you're just
Right.
if all you need to do is talk. Yeah, so like just from a GMing perspective for people looking at it the first time, there's talk to the people that you're involved with, that you're looking to play with, and just kind of figure out what might work the best. You can always try one thing and then switch to something else if that doesn't seem to be kind of conducive to your efforts.
Yeah, I'm kind of really bad about the amount of time I spend with games during normal times. Every Saturday I go and I drive like 40 minutes to my friends where we start at 6 and sometimes we aren't done until 12, usually like 11 or 12. So like 5-6 hours of gaming every Saturday. So much so that when I first started dating my current fiance, I was like, I'm not really available on Saturdays. I have a thing. I have some prior commitments.
Your current fiance?
Yeah. My current fiance. Did I say that?
You did. I know it's easy
to.
There was a time when you often referred to him as your current boyfriend, I'm sure.
Right.
Or your current partner. Yeah,
My then boyfriend, current fiance.
There you go.
You're forever. Yeah.
Future husband.
There you go. I'm just having fun with you.
But yeah, but when I first started, the first time I ever role played was Play by Post on Neopets, on Neopets forums, and I still have friends that I used to role play with, like back when I was 11, on Neopets. So I've done it all. I've done in person. I've done Play by Post. I've done the virtual tabletops now, like way more than ever. So I
think something to keep in mind too, to think about new GMs out there and anybody that's looking to start up a campaign, even if you've GM'd before, especially if you're looking to try a different game, a game that's not typical for your group, trying something new, is like what's the right length? Like how often do you play and how long do you want to play? Just all of that. Like how long do you want to play per session? How long do you want to play like a campaign? Are you just going to start playing and let it go until it peters out, or do you have an idea in mind? We're going to have a campaign that runs a certain amount of time. Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be every other week? Because that's all, especially, as life gets more and more hectic, as you get older, you have more responsibilities. It becomes harder and harder to necessarily find time weekly.
Right.
Or to find a lot of time weekly, like every other week for 3 hours might be kind of what you can fit, what you can make work. And communicate that to the players, that like this is how often it's going to be. It's going to only maybe be every other week, or whatever the schedule is going to be like. And just trying to get buy-in from everybody that, okay, we'll make sure we always try to hit that, because the less often the game is, the more important it is that you all make it to the game. Right. Otherwise, it's easy for the game to just peter out.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and the scheduling thing is super important, just because you start to depend on players being there and their characters being integral to what is going on, and if they can't make it, then that can throw you off. So it's important to really be upfront about what you're expecting people to want to do at the beginning of the campaign, so that everyone can commit.
It's definitely a commitment too. I feel like I know that it's not just people in my generation who have a problem with this, but particularly in my generation, I feel like it's more socially acceptable to blow off a social commitment for another social commitment. It shouldn't be that accepted, because you are leaving people up in the air when it comes to that. But I see it happen a lot with people around my age. They're like, oh, I'm not going to make it to game tonight. And then they'll go out and hang out with some friends because they had someone schedule something. It's always nicer to give your GM, like if you are a GM, it's always nicer to have that knowledge ahead of time. And if you're a player, giving your GM that knowledge ahead of time helps them make a better game for the players who are still going to be there. Because you can still run a campaign, I feel like our Saturday games we still run if we have at least half of our players, but it does throw things off sometimes if our GM can't prepare ahead, and it throws me off too. I hate being like, oh, I was really planning on having all these people here. Well, I guess I'm not really changing anything, so good luck with what I have set up. But
Yeah, absolutely. I found that during this time of COVID that it has been easier to get people to do stuff weekly than it had been before. And I think it's just because everybody's stuck at home without a lot to do. And they're like, we should be playing games.
They need their fix.
That's right.
I think that's definitely true because they're not making last minute plans to go out to the movies or to go out to the bar or something. It's
right.
Like, this is the thing. I am here. I'm home already. I get it, but like for people, there are some people who have, if you're not neurotypical, committing to a schedule, like there are going to be some days that you're just going to have to drop out of your game. That's going to happen. People who have kids, like things pop up when you have children, apparently. Come on, don't have kids if you want to be a gamer. That's all I have to say.
The big takeaway.
But you can have kids and then they grow up to be gamers like mine. So then you end up having like a captive audience for your games.
Then you've got a built-in
right.
group.
You got a built-in group.
Yeah, some people want to have kids so they can have a baseball team.
That's right.
Some people want to have kids so they can have a game, an RPG group.
I just want 3 kids so that my partner and my 3 kids can be in a D&D adventuring party.
Right.
Train them from an early age. Okay, you're going to be the fighter.
Yeah. But I mean, from a GM perspective, I think you at some point you do have to kind of put your foot down and be, as a GM, you are the one who's expected to keep the schedule, even though it should be a shared responsibility. You are blocking out this amount of time for your group, and people should respect your time because that is a way of showing you that they respect you as well, as a human being whose time is worth something. And that's something that you should cover in your session 0 for sure. Like, okay, here are my expectations for how often people are going to be here, or here's our group expectation. And this is what's going to happen if you are frequently absent or late or something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be late, how much notice would be ideal? Like, right. Try to let me know a couple of days in advance. Don't spring it on me an hour before unless there's absolutely you have no choice.
Mm-hmm. And those have been the most successful games. Like the longest running campaigns I've ever had is when those expectations were set early and they were clear. Of course, as a GM, you can also make the alternative less fun than your game. Like if your game isn't very fun, people might not want to show up all that often. Right. But again, the importance of a session 0 with your group.
Absolutely. And I think that scheduling is something that I think a lot of people may not realize how important it is for long-term health of your game group.
Yeah.
Right. And setting those expectations.
And there's the potential, if you are gaming very regularly and the sessions are very long, there's the potential of a burnout factor too. And so like scheduling time off is not necessarily a bad thing. Say we're going to be running here weekly for whatever amount of time for several months, and we're going to say, okay, now we're just going to take a weekend off, and we're not going to game. People can go out and do their thing that they wanted to do all the time on the weekends, or we're going to shift gears, and we'll like if you're in person, you can do like a board game or a card game night. If you're you can do a one shot of another game to just shake it up and try something else. You can have somebody else GM for a session, and then the GM gets a chance to kind of kick back and just play a character and not have to have the pressure on them for a session or 2 or whatever it is you decide. So I mean, I haven't had a really regular campaign for some time, but whenever I did in the past, like the scheduled downtime or switching gears to a 1-shot or 2-shot type of thing, sometimes with a different GM, was something that I did quite a bit. And it always worked really nicely because it would give everybody a chance to kind of take a breather from whatever it was you were thinking about, and then it would build anticipation for when you came back to it too, because now players are like, oh, we haven't played for a couple of weeks now. I've got this, like, where were we? What was going on? What's the cool thing that's coming up?
Yeah, I was playing in a Blades in the Dark game, and the GM wanted a break, so we've switched, and I'm running the One Ring for them as we take our break, and then we're going to go back to Blades in the Dark after we've gotten a couple of adventures under our belt for the One Ring. So
yeah, that's exactly how my Saturday game does it. Our GM, our usual GM, typically has an idea of how, like, what the steps are going to be for the campaign. Like, here's the end goal of the campaign. It's not something that's going to continue indefinitely, so we're not going to reach that point of burnout. When he's feeling burnt out, we switch it up. We'll have a game night, or someone will do a one shot just like that, and it has been super, super successful.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, GMs need a break too sometimes. So, it can. Yeah, the GM, I think, is working pretty hard most of the time to make sure everything's entertaining and to do all the prep and everything that they need to do for the game. So, giving them a break every once in a while is good.
And if you're the GM,
you just reminded me that I need to buy a Christmas present for my GM.
Yes. And if you're the GM, it's okay to ask for that break.
Yes. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. Don't put yourself in the spot where you burn yourself out, right?
Been there.
Yeah. When the GM stops showing up to games, then you know the game is dead.
That's guaranteed to kill it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When I GM, I try to have a set goal or endpoint that I know that the players will reach. So I know when the light at the end of the tunnel is, and I know, like, oh man, I wonder if I could speed through this a little bit, or if they're having a lot of fun, maybe I'll linger here in this place for a while. It helps me avoid that burnout too, because I want to reach the end of the story just like the players do.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, a lot of times when I've had a set goal or something, I haven't reached it as the GM, just because the game has died off or something before I got there. But I do generally have some sort of idea of what the shape of the campaign is going to be.
Yeah, it's just hard when you have like 5 people, 5 different schedules all at the same time. It's hard to find the little piece in the middle of your Venn diagram of everyone's schedules that works.
Yeah.
Like Doodle is a godsend for scheduling.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Doodle.com, everybody. It's free. I've used it. I've used it a ton over the course of the past couple of years. To schedule meetings for stuff, and you use it for scheduling games pretty easily too. Especially if you have players that can't necessarily commit to the same time and on the same day all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. If you don't have like a regular game day, Doodle is super useful.
Like, there's something to be learned from LARPs too, because I also LARP because I again do every kind of gaming under the sun here, where LARPs will have their game days scheduled months in advance, so people can kind of clear their calendars if they're going to be there. But it's also not necessary for everyone who normally plays to be there at the LARP that day. So thinking about what is necessary for your group, if you have a couple of parents that, sometimes they have things come up, maybe know that, hey, around school time, like in the summer, things might be a little bit more flexible, but like during the school year, maybe you shouldn't have any big character plot developments that are going to revolve around that character, or have some sub plans where you have something you can throw at them that's a little bit more one-shotty if that person isn't going to be there, but you really do need their specific character. Sometimes you got to do a lot of juggling.
Sure.
As a GM,
especially if like if the player in question being, like, let's say they're a parent and they've got a child who's going to be doing some theater thing, so there's going to be like all of a sudden they're going to have to be running people to rehearsals, and there's going to be the first performances, and there's going to be certain times during the year that are going to be bad, whereas other times they might have more flexibility. So that goes with any player for any time for any
Right.
time constraints. Like certain people, if you've got players that are that like they go to do a thing, like they go to the Renaissance Festival every weekend for October. If there's a Renaissance Festival around you that is in October, that okay, well, Octobers are just bad for them. Maybe that player needs to just be written out of the game temporarily,
Right.
and then bring them back in with a big flourish and give their character something great in the first episode that they're back. In the first game that they're back, welcome them back.
Yeah.
And if you are that player, tell your GM in advance too. Let them know, like,
Yep.
hey, these are the days that don't work for me. Like as soon as you know, let them know.
Yeah. Just so that the long-term plans can be adjusted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
It's so tricky. Scheduling is just so, like I run like the journalism program at my high school, and that's a group of like 18 kids, and I'm like trying to like figure out, okay, what day works for this? Oh, well, you have dance practice, and there's a band concert that day. Well, okay, I guess we have to move it because that's 5 of my it's so tricky. And there's not, unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all solution for your scheduling problems. This is like the number one problem that everyone who games that I talk to has is
Right.
scheduling.
or find players like me who don't go anywhere or do anything.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then scheduling is a breeze.
Or play by post, where you're not necessarily synchronous.
Yep.
If you are a person who has like a weirdly hectic schedule, play by post is really fun. You have a little bit more time to think about what your character is doing. There's a little bit more like, you just have a little bit more leeway in thought. You're not making a fatal mistake by blurting the first thing that comes out of your mouth. You're not like trash talking a dragon, for example. You're like, oh, well, maybe that's not a good idea. I'll get in space a little bit. And you can play that asynchronously. And like, okay, I posted my thing. I'm going to come back and check the play by post tomorrow. I have never really played play by post with more than 2 people, but I know people who have. And they really do enjoy it.
Yeah, I've had play-by-post disintegrate just because people stop participating. But I've had in-person games that had the same problems.
Yeah. That's a hazard no matter what.
Right.
So
Right.
let's see. Now that we've solved all your problems
Right.
about how to
Either that or
schedule and
scared
get
you
people
off
squared
from,
away from GMing.
If you do exactly what we said.
Let's see. Did we want to shift gears?
I think so. I think
Sure.
like that's basically all we can say about scheduling.
I
It's
agree.
hard.
It's hard.
A lot of communication.
A lot of communication, yeah, and stating your expectations up front, I think, is the most important thing.
Definitely.
What's next, Jess?
Well, we're going to talk about mechanics, and we're going to talk about using other pre-built systems, SRDs, like systems that are already made and set up that you can insert your own game into as a game designer.
Yeah, I have done this many times now.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So my game Bulldogs was originally done for the D20 system, which was 3rd edition D&D, which had an SRD, and so you could modify it. Bulldogs is a space adventure game, so it was very, very different than Dungeons and Dragons. So I made a lot of modifications. And then when I did 2nd edition, I decided to use the Fate system for it, which I think was a better fit for the kind of zany adventures that I was aiming for in that game. But I've also worked with Powered by the Apocalypse, which is another game system that's out there that you can use if you want to. There's a lot of games that use it. The latest project I was working on was called Thousand Arrows, which is a Japanese Warring States period game using Powered by the Apocalypse rules.
Yeah, I love Powered by the Apocalypse. Moonpunk's Powered by the Apocalypse, and it kind of worked with what we wanted to do, and it was a little easier kind of as a springboard for our first major release as 1B Games, and it was just fun to do. I liked playing Powered by the Apocalypse.
Right. I mean, well, and I'll say every game that I've designed in a system, it's because I've enjoyed the system. So it's not like I've picked a system for reasons other than it's something that I think is enjoyable and good to use. So
Yeah. For newbie designers out there, if you're not familiar, SRD is, I think it stands for System Reference Document. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that, like, D&D has an SRD, Pathfinder has an SRD. There are SRDs for lots of different games out there, and that's an easy way to kind of skin on your own setting and your own game onto an already there system. You're using their rule set. The wonderful thing about games is that you can't really copyright mechanics. That's not a thing. Like,
that's
you can
not
copyright
a thing.
names.
Yeah.
You can copyright names. You can, like, Wizards of the Coast has copyrighted Tiefling, for example, like the name Tiefling. And I think Beholder is also under copyright.
It is. Like I think that's one of their own custom creatures. So yeah.
Yeah, but you can't copyright Elf.
Nope.
Elf is not a thing that you can copyright.
No, that's been in the public domain for a long time. So
yeah, and you can't copyright roll a d20 and add your modifier for a skill. You can't copyright that.
Well, to be fair, you can copyright the method in which the specific wording of how the rule is presented, but the rule itself is not copywritten. The three of us could each describe the basic D20 mechanic in three different ways, using different words, different sentences, different structure of how you're presenting the information. That's what you can't copyright.
Yeah.
That's what you can't. That is what you can copyright. You can't copyright, like, the idea of roll a d20 and add or subtract a number.
Right.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the golden age of RPGs that we live in right now is there's a lot of systems that are just sitting there that are completely usable with more or less involvement by the developer of the system as far as quality control or that sort of thing goes to. Like, some things you can just use straight up, and some things some companies hold a little bit tighter of a leash. They just want to see an example of what you're planning to produce, so that if you're going to use a logo that they have for their system, that they feel comfortable that you're producing something that kind of fits what the game is like about and what the system does.
And that's what I'd say. Anytime you want to sort of brand it to associate it with another game system, you're going to need permission for that. Using the SRD is generally open. That the whole point of that is that it's open source game technology is what the SRD is for. So you can grab that, you can repurpose it, you can tweak it, you can do anything you want, you can call it anything you want. So long as you have the right documentation that goes with it. But if you're going to be doing something like saying that it is powered by Fate, you need to have the permission of Evil Hat Productions, who does Fate, to put that logo on there.
And if you're making an honest to goodness effort to create something that is true to the system and isn't going to, like, reflect poorly on the company or the designer that developed it, I don't think I've heard too many stories of people being denied use of a system because, like, if I were to create a system that was let's say Creative Commons, like, let's say, for example, the Capers system, which is Creative Commons, like, if somebody wanted to use that, as long as it's being presented kind of fairly and I'm being credited as having designed the system, that's great. Like, that's marketing for me. Like, other people are going to learn about the system and learn about my games by buying or playing your game. The real kicker for me, the thing that I find the most interesting about using an existing system, is finding the system that is right for the type of game you want to design.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say there's only one system that is necessarily like that, but there's usually systems that are better for the thing you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And not to say, like I'll put this out there. The D20 system gets used for a lot of stuff.
It does.
And it does because I think primarily it's very, very well known. People understand it. People who are trying out game design, it's a system they know. They understand it. They know how to tweak it. They've probably modded it and done things with it in house rules and so forth. But D20, unless you strip it and really do weird stuff with it, D20 plays a certain way. It plays a certain type of game.
Yeah.
Where characters become like godlike heroically, with crazy powerful magic and big hit bonuses, and they do tons of damage. And but so if you're designing a game that doesn't do that, it's like a political game. Maybe D20 is not the right game, the right system to use without like heavily modifying it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did, as I designed Bulldogs in the D20 system originally, and it felt a little bit like I was shoehorning it in when I did that. I don't think that it was a bad game, but it definitely didn't have the same feel I wanted out of the game. Whereas when I switched it to Fate, it had that sort of pulpy feel that Fate gives you, that I really wanted out of the game. And so when I switched over to the Fate system, I felt like it really was much more a home for that particular property.
Yeah, I was gonna ask like what worked for Fate versus the D20 system. I was really interested in that.
Yeah, so Bulldogs is sort of a scrappy, pulpy Star Wars without Jedi kind of setting, right? People have said it's kind of like Firefly crossed with Guardians of the Galaxy kind of feel for it. So the thing that Fate does is it gives you those aspects which really let you sort of juice your character, and they say a lot about the character, and they're you can bring in humor and stuff into the game through them. Whereas D20 had a class system, which the classes I had to really customize to fit a space adventure game. And in the end, I didn't feel like some of them were the greatest builds that I could have done for classes. Like I had to do pilots and engineers and things like that, which are a little harder to deal with in the D20 system. Fate is very fast and smooth, and you say what you're going to do, you do it. You can get these legendary actions that show off how good your character is at things, and that's kind of what I wanted for the pulp system.
Yeah, I've heard multiple people describe Fate as a good one for pulp style storytelling, because it does allow you to create a fairly, even at like starting level, quote unquote, a fairly competent character. And so with aspects and fate points, like you can build a character that can really kind of have those big moments pretty easily. And have kind of the big pulp moments. Whereas, something like the Powered by the Apocalypse games is less about action. I mean, you certainly can do action, but PBTA focuses quite a bit on like what does the narrative feel like? What does your character feel like? Where's the story going? It pushes the story to the forefront, and it's not quite as worried about mechanical kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And the most common result in a PBTA game is a partial success, right? Yep. As opposed to a Fate game where you're very commonly going to be able to succeed by a large margin because you have resources at your command that allow you to do that. So yeah, PBTA has a much, the feel I think of PBTA is there's a lot more risk involved in trying to do things. And that's not what you want for pulp. You want people, trying crazy things, like jumping from one spaceship to another without a spacesuit on, you know.
PBTA. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, PBTA, like you were saying, you can succeed at stuff, but there's always the twist that goes with it. There's always the little downside, or the little thing that bites you in the butt. There's the complication that gets added, or you do the thing, but not quite in the way you wanted to not to full efficacy. So there's always new developments. There's always something new happening in the moment. Whereas games that get more pulpy, like like Fate or Savage Worlds, where it's like, you go big or go home. Like you get the big success and boom, that you do the thing and it's like woohoo, and that's great, and then you move on to the next big thing.
Right.
There's also a little bit more GM interference being run when you're running a Fate game versus a Powered by the Apocalypse game. For PBTA, the characters, your players, are making most of the primary decisions, and your role as the master of ceremonies is to react to what they are doing, rather than your players reacting to what you're doing. You can do that with any game, but Powered by the Apocalypse is like meant to do that specifically. So if you want mechanics for your game where the GM has a little bit more agency, I wouldn't go with that.
No, and I agree. Powered by the Apocalypse is very player driven. You as a GM aren't even making any rolls, so you're just reacting to everything that the characters do, and when their failures come up, that's when you get to push forward all the stuff that you want to push forward as the GM. But I've had definite runs of the game where everybody succeeded at everything all night long, and so not much bad happened to them.
Yeah,
but I've also had the runs. Yeah, I've had the runs where they failed at everything too, and so it just became an escalating snowball of terrible things. So
I'm trying to think what else. Go ahead.
There's a lot you can take to. My recommendation for designers would be to play a bunch of different games. You'll be surprised when you see how many games are based off of another system or really heavily inspired by another system, even if they are not using like the same mechanics or the same SRD. There's a lot out there, and you might not know that the perfect system already exists for what you want to do, unless you try to go and experience those things. And you don't have to necessarily even play them. Like you can just read the books. And
you get in discussions. Get start up discussions online. Go to on your social media or go to forums where they're talking about stuff, and just pick people's brains about like what like it can be as simple as just saying, okay, like here's a list of like 6 or 8 or whatever systems that are well known, and just ask people, what do these do well? What do you think these do well? What's the strengths of these systems? What's the weaknesses of these systems? And you'll get a lot of different opinions.
Absolutely.
But there will certainly be some amount of consensus among. If you get enough opinions, there'll be like you'll start to see the through lines of what the different systems do well.
Yeah, and one of the advantages of doing that is that if you're developing your own system and not really trying to modify an existing one, you see a variety of mechanics and different ways of approaching things, and that can help you sort of form your own mechanics as well.
It's also helpful to know that you are not the first person to ever think of this thing.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Everything that I've done has always been inspired by and driven by my experiences with other games. So all the mechanics I've come up with have either been a reaction to things I didn't like, or a co-optation and an adaptation of something that I did like. So.
And there's if you're working with somebody's an existing system, generally speaking, there's very few systems are so unforgiving that you can't modify and add things to them. You can tweak a little bit about how certain things work. You can add subsystems that kind of fit in the vein of the core system of the game, but then add something new to the game. Like a common thing I see in some systems is like, if you've got a group of characters, like if it's a space game, is the ship like a character? Does the ship do things? Is the ship important in some way? So you can build something out. You could take any system pretty much and just make the ship a character in some way. Give them something that they give the ship something that it can do that benefits the group, that makes it kind of unique and special. If the characters are in a group, like the group that they're part of, the club or the organization or the guild or whatever, might be something that you can build out and give some sort of mechanical significance.
Definitely, and some systems are really good for that. Like in Bulldogs, it uses Fate, and the ship has all these aspects that you're able to call upon when you're using your ship. It also has a trouble, which means that the GM is going to be giving you fate tokens when the problems that the ship has comes up. So it's all part of that sort of fate economy.
That's my favorite thing about Fate is the aspects. I borrowed some of that for Moonpath Contact. So.
Yeah. Aspects are a really cool tool.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take any part of that system too. You could take, well, here's a system that isn't terribly deadly, and you can modify if you want, if you like everything about what the system does, but you want it to be a little grittier. You can take whatever the hit point or condition or stress or whatever the mechanic is called, and modify that so it's rougher. It's more difficult to deal with, and like getting injured is more impactful,
right,
in the game. Or you can go the other direction. So there's always a way to kind of tweak stuff, and I personally recommend that's a good way to start if you're going to design something for the first time. Is start with a system that you feel kind of does the job, and maybe play and tweak a little bit with some things, rather than putting yourself through the arduous task of designing a whole system from the ground up, unless you're really sure that you're ready for it. And that's something we'll be talking about in the future.
Yeah, definitely a good place to start as a new designer. It's not the only place you have to start, but your game is not going to be more impressive if you invent your own new system. Your game is impressive if the stories that you're able to tell within that game are fun. That's what makes a game good.
Sure.
Use the tools you got. No one's gonna judge you for doing a PBTA game. They're gonna be like, "Oh, I love PBTA, and I'm gonna play this game now."
Right. And there's something to be said for having an audience kind of built in.
Yeah.
Because there are some people out there who love to play Fate, and they just love trying out different genres and settings in the Fate fold.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to move into a new game and then have something familiar that you can sort of ground yourself on as you're exploring a whole new world, but it's still a PBTA game or still a Fate game, so you know what you're doing as far as the system goes. So I think as a player, there's definitely something really useful about that.
For sure. Well.
So there you go. Start designing a game. Start hacking a system.
Yeah.
One of these days, I'll do that.
You hack a system, you are a game designer. That's my opinion.
It's true. Yeah. I agree. I 100% agree. And eventually it gets to like the ship of Theseus point where
right. Exactly.
Is this a new game now? Like, what is this?
That can happen too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Speaking of things that are a little bit derivative, you know how every fantasy book is about Lord of the Rings? That's my segue into
but a little different
topic. Elves.
Elves and dwarves.
I'm so bad at segues.
That's okay.
Our potpourri topic for today is about fantasy literature.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of fantasy literature. I still am. I started real early. Obviously, The Hobbit was one of the first things that I read, which is, it's a classic for a reason. So
it's so good. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And I started with Tolkien at an early age. And what did they say? I'm trying to remember what the quote is. That oh man, I can't remember it. There's a quote that's about some classical author saying that everything that came afterwards is a footnote to them, and I will say that most modern fantasy is a footnote to Tolkien. So.
Yeah.
I will say it's changed a lot more recently. I've read some good stuff that isn't as derivative, but there was a real stretch there for a while where you had your elves and your dwarves, and that was about it.
I think Tolkien just did he was a linguist and a historian, and he had his mind on all of this very European tradition fantasy. If you look at the fantasy novels coming from other cultures, there's not a lot of stuff that you could call derivative from Tolkien.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
But I mean, there's so much cool stuff out there. It's just, you know, when you get elves, you say elves and everyone starts thinking of Tolkien elves rather than like Santa elves now.
Right.
Well,
that's true.
What have you been reading, Brennan, or even just, you know, recently or in the, you know, past 10 years, or even just like anything, like what's not derivative? What's a good
Well, I've read
go-to
some
for?
really cool stuff recently that has been much less Tolkien-esque, I would say. The N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth series,
Oh my gosh.
which is
love
excellent. Yeah. And then there's another author, and I'm kicking myself because I can't remember his name, but he writes these very Afrocentric fantasy novels that are, you know, all about characters with supernatural powers and the ability to split between worlds and things like that, which are, you know, just really, really good, solid books that are not told from a European perspective, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
I like getting new perspectives on the fantasy genre.
The 5th season, the N.K. Jemisin, like the first novel in that Broken Earth series, the 5th season, it was the first time in a while that I have felt so hooked by a fantasy story. I was like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen. And like when the realization of who the characters are, when that happens without spoiling anything, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing. I loved how she did the world there. It felt fresh and new and engaging and dark. Oh, I loved it.
Yeah, the world building was really good in those.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Definitely, I would recommend that book to any adult reader. I would not recommend that book series to a younger reader, though.
No.
Maybe like 16 and up is probably where I would cut it off as a teacher.
Yeah. And I'm not as into the YA stuff anymore. I don't know exactly what's going on with that, but I do know that there's a lot of good stuff for younger readers out there too. The young adult as a genre is much more of a genre than it was when I was a kid. I mean, I picked up Lord of the Rings and started reading it when I was like 12. So
right, but
not exactly for kids.
No, Tolkien is not young adult.
No, it's not. No,
it's heavy reading.
I probably would have been reading other stuff that was a little easier for me.
Yeah, that's some thick language.
It is
in those books.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah,
it's a bit of a slog.
Yeah,
The Hobbit's pretty good, like for a young.
The Hobbit is a young reader book. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't read that until I was an adult, though. I was
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, oh, this is so quick, because I had already read Fellowship before. Oh, this is so different.
Right. It is. And what is so hilarious about it is that Lord of the Rings was what he produced when his publisher asked for a sequel to The Hobbit. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could say more on like what teens and middle schoolers. I should be able to. I'm an English teacher. I teach high school.
Okay.
But I don't pay that much attention to what my students are reading. I kind of let my librarians make those decisions for them, because all the books I read, you know, are the books I like to read, and they're for mostly a more adult audience, and not all of them I can recommend. Like, I've seen some kids read A Song of Ice and Fire, but I'm not gonna go recommend that to them.
Right. Right. And I did read that whole Game of Thrones series, which I really enjoyed at first, and then kind of lost interest in over time. But
Yeah.
that one was really engaging. The beginning of it, just because the way it plays with your expectations. So.
Yeah. I think that has been such a trope, though, that now we're always expecting our expectations to be subverted.
Right.
So
longer.
the next great fantasy story, whether it come in series or movie or book format, is going to be the author that spends the entire time making you think that they're about to subvert something. And you're just waiting on the edge of your seat for that subversion to come, and it never does, and it ends up being exactly like a classic fantasy tale. But they're gonna do it real smartly, where they're gonna subvert little things. They're gonna hint at this and hint at that, and then they're gonna oh, I didn't expect that it would end exactly like it should.
Right.
Wait, hold on. They became the king? I don't get it.
They lived happily ever after.
A happy ending?
all the main characters introduced in the first 4 chapters survived to the end.
Right. I don't know. I do think we're living in a real rich time for fantasy media, because we now have the ability to adapt some of this stuff to the screen, which was not possible before, without it looking really, really cheesy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Kingkiller Chronicles is apparently going to be adapted to the screen, or is in the process, and I mean, that's not finished yet. The last book we're still waiting on, but yeah, without looking cheesy is the main point. I mean, the Sci-Fi Channel has been doing a lot of that for a while now, but
yeah. But I feel like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings adaptation really showed people what it could do, and that it could be a real pop culture phenomenon again. So,
but at the same time, then though, they did the Hobbit movies,
and
in the same vein, and
yeah, which was a they should have taken a different approach to that property. I agree.
Definitely.
Yeah. But I like some of the more modern fantasy stuff that I read. I read a lot of Neil Gaiman, and his more modern take on fantasy, which like urban fantasy style stuff, which I really enjoy. Urban fantasy is definitely a genre that I'm into.
Yeah,
I'm waiting to see. Oh, sorry.
No.
I'm waiting to see if they're ever going to get around to making The Talisman or Eyes of the Dragon. Stephen King dipped his toe into fantasy a little bit here and there. I mean, the Dark Tower series has plenty of fantasy too, but it's weird fantasy. Whether we'll see the Dark Tower in any sort of complete big way, who knows. But The Talisman could make a movie, and Eyes of the Dragon could be a movie, and that's a young adult story. That's much more oriented toward kids.
Towards kids, yeah.
Jess, are you familiar with the Eyes of the Dragon?
I am not. I haven't read it. I've only read a couple Stephen King's. I haven't. I've watched a lot of movies, but I haven't read a lot of the books. That
was Stephen King writing a story for his daughter.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's very classic fantasy trope. There's a lot of classic fantasy stuff in it, but there's some stuff in there that's very surprising.
Yeah, I love it's kind of hard to separate some horror and sci-fi from fantasy.
Yes.
And I love those genre intersections, like you were talking about with the urban fantasy, Brennan.
Yeah.
Just the genre intersection is so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reading Tamsin Muir's Gideon the Ninth right now, which is about it's a space fantasy, but they're all necromancers. So that's an interesting take on it. That they animate dead bodies as their robots, basically.
Yeah, Dresden Files does. I mean, Dresden Files has its own tropes within the series and everything, but I like how pulpy it is, and I like the blending of the horror and the fantasy and the urban nature of it. It's just a fun read.
I'm a big fan of that series too. I just got the final book for Christmas, so
I am not caught up at all. My sister got me a book for Christmas called The Darker Side of Magic that I'm really excited to get into. I don't remember who the author is. The title might be slightly different than what I just said, but I'm very ready for that. And I just read I gifted her a book that I read a while back called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which combines the mystery genre, like almost like a murder mystery, Hercule Poirot style with fantasy, and that was really fun. It's like Groundhog's Day meets Agatha Christie.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, there's just a lot of cool, fun stuff people are doing with the fantasy genre, and I love that as a game designer because a lot of games are fantasy based.
Yes.
There's fantasy games?
Where?
Everywhere.
Well, people just like it. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's escapism, and that's kind of why we play games.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I understand why people like to play games that are a little bit more like a realistic style, like more not hardly any games are just plain mundane. Although there are games that exist out there like that. But who doesn't want to go slay a dragon, you know? Or revenge run, ride one, be one.
Be one.
Do something in the dragon milieu.
Right.
It's just fun. And the more cool stuff that writers like, I feel like writers themselves, you know, they spend a lot more time in their own heads thinking about the worlds. They're not beholden to like a mechanic system, so they can do all sorts of fun experimentation, and then we can let it trickle down on us like Reaganomics onto our games. Yeah,
that's great. I agree. And that's one of the reasons that this is the topic that I picked, is just because it ties so much into what I'm doing with gaming in general, that that's why one of the reasons I enjoy gaming so much is that I've been such a big fan of the literature. Mm-hmm. And so I take inspiration from that into my gaming groups and bring in various tropes from those books that I've read into the game.
Yeah. And it's fun too to subvert those expectations.
Yeah.
So some of my favorite modules are plays on fantasy tropes that don't quite go the way you expected.
Right.
Like, I remember one of the first games I ever played of D&D, we were supposed to go slay a dragon, but it turns out the dragon was the good guy all along. We had to save the dragon from the angry townsfolk. I loved that. That was so fun.
My first written professional credit that I actually got paid money for was a subversion of the Damsel in Distress.
Oh, that's great.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do. There's Rinkworks.com. I play some of the choose your own adventure style text adventure games on there, and they do a lot of that too, and they turn it in a humorous way. They had a really good subversion of the Damsel in Distress too, where the damsel was also trying to save you all along.
Yeah.
Nice.
In mine, the damsel was a dryad whose the forest had been corrupted and her tree was going to die, which was going to kill her. And she had a love who had gone off to find the means to save her, and then he disappeared. So they had to go save the hero.
Nice.
Who was saving the damsel.
I love that.
That's awesome.
That's so fun. Man, now I want to go watch Lord of the Rings.
I've been staring at it on my on streaming. Every so often I'm popping through looking at stuff, and I was like, well, if I start watching one of them, I'm going to have to watch all of them. So when do I want to commit to, 10 hours of movie?
I have several friends who make it a yearly tradition around this time to watch
it.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
It's been a while. I should sit down again.
Yeah, it's been quite a bit since I have seen them. I feel like I've seen the Hobbit movies a couple times, but that's because someone else was watching them and I was just in the room.
Yeah.
I don't like those movies.
No, and that's the thing. I was such a fan of the Lord of the Rings, and then
so sad.
Then I was so disappointed by the Hobbit. Yeah.
Well, this was a lot of fun. I love talking about all of this. It's so nice to, I love thinking about fantasy because now I want to go write or I want to go read or watch.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up then. Are we all good to go?
I
Yep.
think so.
I think so. So, Brennan, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you on socials?
Yeah,
Plug your
sure.
stuff.
You can find me at Brennan Taylor on Facebook and at Brennan R. Taylor on Twitter. And my website is www.galileogames.com.
Do you have any cool stuff coming out soon?
Yeah, 1,000 Arrows will be released early next year. That is the Japanese Warring States period game using Powered by the Apocalypse, which I think is going to be it's done some really interesting things with the system. So I think it'll be cool stuff for people to check out.
Cool.
Excellent.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at @Joska, and I don't have anything cool coming out. So instead, why don't you do some good mutual aid and help out your community? Buy games from a local person. That's my plug.
And I'm Craig Campbell. I'm Nerdburger Craig on Twitter. The website is nerdburgergames.com, and I'm still moving toward low stakes. Early next year, layout is almost done. That's what I've been doing on my holiday weekend. I learned how to do the layout. It's not super fancy, but it's getting there.
And we can see some actual plays of that on this very Twitch channel, can't we? Or is that Good Strong Hands that you just did?
That's Good Strong Hands that we just did.
Okay.
Low stakes, yeah. Low stakes has barely been seen by anybody. I had like a little playtest group. We crunched it out. Although I have already gotten some people kind of coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, when this goes to Kickstarter, I want to put it on my Twitch channel."
Awesome.
So they want to run something. Brennan, for are you familiar with What We Do in the Shadows?
I am.
That's low stakes.
Okay.
It's
nice.
it's that as an RPG basically.
That's
I
great.
am a sucker for a good pun.
Yes.
So there you go, everybody. Thank you for listening. Now go design a game or GM or read some fantasy literature. Because if you don't, after we spent a whole hour talking about those things, then we will be very, very sad.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want that.
We'll know too.
Yep, totally. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again in 2 weeks on Friday, though. This is a special Saturday edition because of Christmas.
Yep.
Scheduling. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.